Alderman Moore. Alderwoman Murphy.
Here.
Alderman Kotar. Alderwoman Martin. Alderwoman Boyd.
Here.
Alderman Bosley.
Here.
Alderwoman Middlebrook.
Present.
Chairman Boyd.
Present.
5 present, you have quorum.
Okay. We will excuse the alderman from the 7th and the 11th. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes dated November 26th.
Second.
I move that we approve the minutes of November 26th.
Okay, been moved in second. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Moore. Alderwoman Murphy.
Yes, aye.
Alderman Kotar. Alderwoman Martin. Alderwoman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderman Bosley.
Aye.
Alderwoman Middlebrook. Chairman Boyd.
Aye.
5 aye votes.
Okay. First board bill up will be, how about we do it this way? Board Bill 193, sponsored by Alderwoman Tyus.
Okay, great. First one I want to talk about. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for having me before you today. Sorry I ran a few minutes late, okay. I left my phone at home. Board Bill 193 does not attempt to get rid of traffic calming. It attempts to get rid of the last phase of traffic calming, which includes the speed humps. I voted for this when I was on the street committee. The original ordinance, 7033, which was sponsored by Alderman Carter and some others. And I did it wanting to believe that we should have a comprehensive street plan. I have been appalled at how the program has been run, how long it takes things to get, and also the small microcosm of detail that they use to tell you when you cannot have a speed hump. Before this was, I sat on streets since 1991. I closed a lot of streets in my community, which has saved a lot of my streets because people were flying through them. So we did a street plan a long time ago before any of these people sitting out here ever was sitting in their positions, okay? So, but I wanted to work with them. I applied for, over a year ago, some street humps. I am a very detailed person, so I have a petition that you have to do. You have to get so many people on the street. I go through a process. By the time I bring it in here, it is already what the people in the community want. I was surprised they granted 2 street humps and said we could do it on 2 streets, but a third one was like 3 or 4 miles per hour, too low, they said, and they wouldn't do it. What you have to know about my communities, I represent 5 communities, but 3 of them I've represented for almost 30 years, and that's Kingsway East, Kingsway West, and Penrose neighborhoods. And they're very straight, and the Kingsway West has what's called triple streets. You actually, there's no break in a lot of the streets, so once they get on them, they use them as highways. We also have the problem that back when Mayor Bosley was the mayor, BPS and Mayor Bosley, over the objections of the citizens, widened Kings Highway just in our area between Martin Luther King and 170. And that's the only part that Kings Highway is wide like that. So that is also a speedway. We told them what was going to happen. They cut down all the trees. This was before Mr. Bradley was here. So this is the prior person. Everything we said has happened. So we have, besides all the other problems that I know other people have, we have speed demons in our community. We do have the public safety director that lives there. We thought it would be better. It has not. I want to make that a record, okay? Because when people call me, I tell them the public safety director lives a few blocks over. We have little and no policing. So for many years we could not do speed bumps, and we finally passed a compromise with speed humps. We have been implementing a traffic pattern in our community for many years. We got it going pretty good. We've changed streets around, and we're down to 3 streets that we cannot do anything else with in the Kingsway West because they have no cross streets. So they said, okay, we could put two streets could have speed humps, but the other one was a few miles per hour too low, and we couldn't. That means all the traffic will then be put on that street. So I argued back and said, hey, this will put all the traffic here. We'll have to wait until that happens. Okay. But the other thing that's just really irritating to me is how long it's taken, because we still don't have any speed humps at all. And the cost and the change of the process, that was not my anticipation when I was voting for this, to include this. There are other traffic calming devices. If it's on a strictly residential street, there is no reason to have I don't need you to do a traffic study and now charge me. And I want to say this because I'm getting ready to share this with all of you all. Since I was here when we first started getting money for the parks, for our tax monies, all this stuff that they're charging you for now, they did not used to. Now they're trying to put their cost of to administration and all that. That was not. So I've been pulling all of my stuff to share with you all so you can see how much money they are now pushing off on us. The city used to have a major street traffic fund, and they had to fund it, so they fixed the Union, Martin Luther King, King's Highway. They paved and paid for that. Now everything is getting pushed to the alder people. Then when you start telling me I got to have a study, and you may be able to say that, no, I can't have speed humps, I don't need that legislation. We don't need it. In fact, I have some other aldermen who have asked me to put their names on it. I'm not trying to get rid of street calming all the way, because actually there were two previous ordinances that address street calming, and that would be, the original one was Ordinance 68663. I'm sorry I didn't make copies, but I have it. And then it was amended by 69995, which I have here, if you all want to. I was making copies when you called me over. Okay. So we would still have street calming. I don't see the need for having street humps in the street calming, and I also don't see the need for paying for traffic studies, and I don't see the need for any of it to take over a year. And so that's why I came to repeal Ordinance 7033, not the street calming, traffic calming thing entirely, but just the one that relates to speed humps.
Let's take a question from the committee's Alderwoman Murphy.
So your contention would be that if we got enough signatures, whatever our individual, thing was in a block, say 60% of the people on the block, that they should automatically get a speed hump?
On residential streets. There's no reason not to.
Okay.
My neighborhood is self-contained. It's not affecting anybody else. The blocks that they turned down make no sense at all, okay, said there's not fast enough. They went through, to me, when your neighbors go through and do this, and that would be like if we turned over street closings. We're turning over all our power to people who have no idea what our neighborhoods are doing, okay? And we had a lot more power, and we are slowly but surely turning over to bureaucrats. And they do bureaucratic answers, not answers that help people. If I had not closed all of my streets in the 4,900 blocks, which people who live in North St. Louis know, almost all of the Kings Highway, they're closed. That's what kept everybody. That's what kept us public safety director. Those are the things that keep people here. So it made no sense. And it doesn't make any sense a year later I don't have speed humps. Over a year, okay? So yes, I do think that we can do our own process. We were elected. Those are things that can also be taken down. If they're really affecting somebody, then they can be taken down, they can be removed, okay? But to just have to sit here and wait and then have to pay for a study, and then they can tell you no, why?
That's all, thank you.
Alderwoman Boyd.
Thank you, Alderwoman Tyus. And I totally agree, because I was blown away when they came back and said it's $900 to do a speed study, which I hadn't been paying for a speed study. But I guess my question is, if we are going through the processes, and I'm kind of on the page where you are, if residents come to me and want the street closed, then I make them go through a process. We're not going to just say close the street. They have to do a petition. I even went so far and had a block take pictures of cars that have been damaged. And so I never got a response back. I even put in an ordinance to change make the street one-way, and that never happened. So, I mean, I agree with you with this. It's kind of a struggle because now we're running into property values and insurance is taking people out because of the high damage to their properties. So I'm in support of this.
Bosley.
Thank you. I just want to say I really appreciate you bringing the legislation forward, because I have been hearing about the problems and issues, been seeing it, witnessing it. I think it would be much easier if we want kind of anything done in our ward that's not, it's like, that's not electrical or anything, that's like impeding the flow of ambulances or emergency vehicles. If the residents want it, we should pretty much be able to say this is what we want if we have the funds. So I don't have too many questions at all, other than how quickly do you think we'll be able to get them after we repeal this? Like, is this something where, once we say we want them, they come out and put us in line and say, hey, the Alderwoman wants 30 and this Alderperson? Because I think right now we only got one crew doing them throughout the entire city.
That's another problem, if I could address that. So when I was on streets years ago, we had one crew doing sidewalks. They got so far behind and was sticker. And so that was when Mary Ross, so I'm going to go way back in the 90s. But then we made it have to have two crews. After the first time, they then just gave both of the contracts to sticker, so we had to come back. So I'm not going to tell you that the bureaucrats are going to try to let go of their power. They're going to say, oh, no. I tell them, run for office, get elected, then take the heat, okay? So we can come back with legislation. I have that legislation right on my desk where we can make them do more than one contract and that we prevent them from giving it to the same person. Okay, so there are other things. This was just my first reply once I heard about the $900 study, because I turned my stuff in comprehensively. I turned in each of my neighborhoods. I sent it in, and that's the way I do things. Holistically. When they said we had money to tear down, the 2 days later I had all my neighborhoods. This is what we need for the next 4 or 5 years. So we can do other things. I didn't want to come too strong. I first wanted to test the waters.
Right. So I wasn't saying anything, because I actually think the crew does good work. It's just, I think our process sucks.
That's exactly right.
So my question was like, do you think this would, well, I think Streets does a good job responding also, but they are always waiting for paperwork. It goes from this hand to that hand. So I'm just thinking, is this like, a month that we say we want the sidewalk? And maybe that's a question for Streets.
Well, but I'm not saying that they don't do good work, but it's too slow.
Understood.
Sticker did good sidewalk, but it was too slow, and they couldn't do it all. And then they would run from North St. Louis to South St. Louis. That was too much. So I think now they may even have 3 contracts, okay? So I'm the only person that can go back and tell you that history. But I can bring you the actually ordinances where we changed them and said, look, this is not working. There's no reflection on them, except for there's a little bit of reflection when you tell me, oh, you're 3 or 4 miles per hour is too low. And I'm telling you, but this is a triple street. Every other street is going to be turned around one way, everything. So this is going to be the street that they're going to use, and you don't take that into effect. Mm-hmm. I don't like people who just crunch numbers and don't include the people who live in the community.
Understood. Wow, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Alderwoman Middlebrook.
I have no questions. Thank you for bringing this forward.
Okay, I have a question, so I want to make sure that I'm following you. So this is to repeal the last ordinance that we did that allowed for speed humps, correct?
We passed a different ordinance for speed humps. What this repeals is putting that under street calming. If you look at it, let's see.
Right, it's section 1, it says.
Here, I maybe didn't give you this copy here. It's part of the board bill, because anything I repeal, I always attach a copy.
I have it.
Okay.
No, I'm just saying, it on page 2, it reads, ordinance 70333, commonly known as
Yes.
traffic calming
Right.
practices hereby repealed. Okay, so if you repeal that, then that does away with speed humps.
No, it does away with, this is street calming. You understand what I'm saying? There is another ordinance for speed humps, okay, and so I can go pull it. So this just says that you don't put, everything is not under street calming. Okay, so I'm saying we don't need speed humps under street calming.
Okay.
So they still had street calming. I just wanted not to have speed humps.
How's this gonna make the situation better?
First of all, don't need a study. So don't need to pay $900. That's ridiculous. Then we do just like we have been doing for street closing all these many years. Another thing I want to tell you, those pots that they're charging you for, been free for years. They have them laying around. They don't cost any such thing. I'm coming back with the stuff to make them have to give us invoices. It's ridiculous what they're doing. So you just need somebody who's been around long enough to tell you all of the stuff. So when you pass your speed, you come to streets, you're the chair, we bring a petition, which I can show you what we use already, okay? I can share that with you. You do the petition, you get the signatures, then you tell them to get it done within so much time. If that's something they can't do, then we look at getting another contract. Same thing when we do with sidewalks and everything else.
Okay, let's go ahead and hear some testimony from Streets and BPS. Why don't we have Streets come up first?
You want me to stand beside or sit down?
Sit down.
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the board.
Tell us who you are.
My name is Jamie Wilson, Street Director. Trying to take notes here so I can respond on some stuff. I do want to explain, as this traffic calming policy started back in summer of 2016, once it was, I think over the summer was when it finally passed. The intent was for, excuse me, for streets to do some of those studies. During the early days of this, we were able to keep up with it. Even then, it was a pretty aggressive start as folks were pretty in tune with wanting these traffic calming features on their streets. It was a new thing to the city, not a new thing nationwide or globally, but locally here, this was a new thing. So there was definitely a lot of interest in implementing some of these features. So we were able to, and actually before I even do that, when we adopted this policy, looking ahead as best we can, trying to be somewhat pragmatic about this, we didn't want to create a monster that we weren't able to keep up with. So my thought here, not being too nerdy about it, was to have a solution, we need a problem. We need to have an actual problem. I didn't want it to turn into a bunch of stop signs, a bunch of traffic signals, a bunch of those things that have proliferated from the past. I want to do our best to be, when we look back on this at some point in time, to look back and say, those were good installations, those were warranted, they served a purpose. It wasn't just because I want something. So we built in this. If someone comes to you and to one of the alderpersons and says, I have a speeding problem, the intent was, that's great, thanks for bringing it to our attention. I've always said no one knows a ward as intimately as the people that live there and as the alderperson, so that's great. They bring it to our attention. I don't know a certain block of a certain street off the top of my head if there's a speeding issue there. So the intent was, they've alerted us to an issue. We go there, we throw up a radar box on one of the street poles, watch it for a couple days, and then you have it cranks out what the actual speeds were. So it turns something from a subjective thing into something fairly objective when you look at the data and see if there is actually a speeding problem. And this was also to benefit the alderpersons who, I'm sure hear a lot of complaints, not just about speeding, but a lot of different things in their ward. Instead of it being on them to determine if there's an issue somewhere, it's actually a tool for them to say, hey, I hear what you're saying about the speeding problem, but I'm seeing here we're not even close to a speeding problem, or you're right, man, we've got a definite speeding problem here. So it was a tool to be objective, to be the divider between what people observe and what's actually happening. So the intent was to build that into the traffic calming policy. So if there's a problem identified, then there's a whole slew of options under traffic calming, which is nationally a list of a toolbox of things considered for traffic calming. One of which is speed humps, is probably nationwide or even globally, again, probably the most popular traffic calming feature, both because of the ease of installation. It's, a couple $1,000s for a speed hump on a standard street versus some of these other features which are more elaborate, which are a lot of raised concrete, different types of things. Once you start doing that, it's very expensive. So in the end, probably the best bang for the buck in the traffic calming toolbox nationwide is speed humps. So again, we built that in there to be able to identify a problem and then identify what's the proper solution to apply to it. I think by practice, it's become, because it is so cheap and best bang for the buck, it's almost become the traffic hump policy because a lot of folks can't afford, a couple $100,000 worth of raised concrete for a certain stretch of road to narrow it or something like that. It's much more cost effective to spend a couple $1,000s for a speed hump. So that's kind of where it is. So when we did this study, we said, well, we're going to do the speed studies. And we initially, it started pretty hot and heavy, like I said, because there was a lot of ideas stored up as far as where this could be applied. We grew to about 1 request per week. We were trying to do a study once per week. Then it grew to twice a week. And then most recently, when we had to cut it off, we had 3 study locations per week. And our crews, I don't have a traffic speed study crew, so our crews are our signal technicians who do everything under the sun for us. And we're lucky we have them. We're not even fully staffed in traffic, but our guys were not doing anything else. They were just doing those. And while that is a somewhat simple task, it's also taken them time-wise away from everything else. So when there's 3 studies a week, we just couldn't keep up. So it was our intent to say, until the time we can get our staff up and we can be able to do this in a reasonable amount of time, because my looking ahead again was that, hey, we could keep doing it, but you guys, when you put a request in, I'm not gonna be able to get to it for a while. And I didn't want to become an issue where streets can't get to it for a couple months, I mean, it was already, we were struggling to try to keep up with it anyway. I probably should have cut it off earlier than that, but when it's 3 study locations per week and they're each a couple days, you want to get some good data. You don't just want, 5 hours of a study. So you want a good couple days to have some good comfort or confidence level in your data. So I cut it loose, saying we can't keep up and it's got to go to somebody else. Rich could probably speak more to that. We've got on-call consultants that do this. I think there's about 3 of them that the intent is to not have one person keep up with it, but have 3 companies keep up with it. And it's tied, I guess, into their contract. And I don't want to talk for Rich, but I'm sure there's a timeline that can be guaranteed to be able to turn this around for you guys. So it's something that you guys, when you talk to your constituents and they come up with this stuff, you can start talking towards, we're going to expect those study results in a couple weeks, a month, whatever the time frame that is reasonable. And yes, it does cost for them to do it. That's a trade-off. We could do it, we're pulling away from other stuff and I can't ever get to it, or you guys going to pay an amount that's going to be, I guess, a somewhat guarantee or an expectation of when you're going to get those results back. So it is unfortunate that cost, but I'm here on the time side too, so it would not be smart of me or honest of me to say I could keep up with it. I'm trying to be honest that we can't keep up with it, and I don't want to fail you guys in terms of doing this for you. So I don't even want to try to candy coat it that we can keep up with it. So I'd just be letting you down. I'd love to dig in to see if there's, with this policy, if there's more things we can do. If that's one of the issues with the time frame on the turnaround on the studies or the turnaround on construction, or if it's the actual content of the calming policy. I will say those humps, like I said, if you look around, it's not just locally or Jamie Wilson speaking towards this, but if you want to look nationally or internationally at traffic calming, speed humps are probably 3/4 of the time that's what people are talking about. It's the biggest thing. So I don't know how to separate that from there. I am a pretty open guy. I'm willing to talk about what a process would be for that, what the proposed process is versus the one we have, and what differences are. And I'd love to see if we can come up with a solution here that would make you guys happy. And then it, again, would somewhat not micromanage, but manage in some sort of term versus we just put things everywhere, whether it's a speed hump or a stop sign or whatever it is. I just want to have some sort of approach, and not, again, micromanaging, but an approach to applying these type of things in a responsible way. Because as we put these things in, I think to date, I think about 350 traffic calming requests have been put into the city. We've had about 25% of those have justified speed humps, and that's resulted in some locations in more than one hump on a stretch of road. We're probably 150 to 200 speed humps in the city, just in 3 years of having a traffic calming policy. So they're everywhere, and it's growing really fast. So as we put these things in, it's great to understand how we're putting them in. On the backside, I'm looking at how we maintain this type of stuff. So with everything we build, these things get driven over, and they're I said cost effective because they're cheap and they achieve their purpose, but they're fairly cheap and they're not raised concrete. This is asphalt. It's going to break down over time, especially in the Midwest with our freeze thaw. So we're going to have some issues here of maintenance of a pretty prolific thing that we've created here for a good reason, but we got to acknowledge the fact that we have to maintain these things, and that type of thing gets in my head. Not let's make the process so we don't create any to maintain later, but let's be extra smart how we do this, because we're creating obstacles for ourselves to overcome in the future if we don't think things through. I don't mean bring it to a standstill thinking them through, but just purely thinking it through. Thank you. If you have any questions.
Let's go through some questions. Alderman Murphy.
I don't know, I guess, I like the idea of having there be objective data, you know, because I know what happens is that everybody, they saw them one place and then every street wants them. And I envision the city looking like a mogul from the Olympics, you know. So I do kind of what Alderman from the First Ward does. I have them get say 60% of the people on the block request a study, you know, for the speed hump. And then I've had a couple that have come through and a couple that have not, you know. And they're perplexed that it doesn't. So I always tell them, well, we'll revisit it later, you know. So I understand where you're coming from, because I do think we would end up with a speed hump on every street, a couple on every street. And now, so the $900, that's coming from the fact that we are contracting this out to a firm to try to expedite the speed of them being done, you know.
I guess I've heard that it's 900.
That's what I think we were given some
That's what they're saying.
information.
Yeah, that must be the standard cost.
Which
for
seems
most-
kind of steep, but.
Well, when I used to be a consultant back in the day, I mean,
But maybe
that's
not.
5 years ago. I mean, and I'm going to draw a comparison when, and some of the consultants are probably using it where they go lay the traffic hoses out. When you lay two
Yes.
of those, it gets you boom, boom here, and then the box that they're plugged into, the computer, gives you the difference in time and tells you the speed. So that's probably what some of them are doing. We've got the radar box that you just put up on the thing.
Yeah.
For their effort to come in, lay the hoses, come back a couple days later, pick them up, bring them back to the office, process that data, download it, put it into a spreadsheet and send it. It's a pretty quick and dirty thing, both from a field perspective and the office side. I mean, for your crew to go out and lay hoses is not just one guy, it's a couple guys, probably three guys out there. So it used to be about $1,000 a hose location back in the day, so I'm actually kind of surprised it's only $900 now, given the consultant pricing back from when I used to do it back then. But our rule of thumb was always $1,000 per hose location, so this is under it, actually. So, but again, it does cost, and that is unfortunate.
Thank you.
Sure.
Alderman Pam Boyd.
How you doing?
Good.
My question that I have, because I was hearing you talk about how I keep hearing you say what you all are coming up with, how you all are coming up with the answer. And so to me, it's like when the community is saying this, and you're saying that you have people that go out to do the tubes or whatever to track it. And so I guess what I'm looking at, and it's two streets I'm thinking about in particular, is Mimica and Emerson. You all did that on Mimica. And what happened after you all did your study, it wasn't enough speed humps. And so what happened is we never solved the problem. In the beginning, the reason why I pushed for the speed humps because we have school buses coming over there picking up and dropping kids off. And we had a guy that hit West Florissant and turned the corner and never stopped. And he wound up on top of somebody's house. And so then when you all come back and I say, you know, we need to do something, so you tell me you all have a toolbox. So you telling me it was other things that we could have looked at beside the speed humps. And nobody from streets said, You know what, Alderwoman? Maybe speed hump's not the answer. And so I guess that's what my question is. I agree with the Alderwoman from the first. You all are telling us, and you supposed to be the experts, you telling us this is what's the best thing for you. But then when you do it, it's not the best thing. We wind up in the same predicament or even worse. That's the first question. And then the second question is, what else is in the toolbox beside the speed bumps?
First, well, relative to your Mimica question, I don't know what was discussed with you back then, but it is true. It is and that's again, it's by popularity becomes, to Joe Blow talking about it, may think it's called the speed hump policy, but in reality, it's traffic calming, and it was written for a whole bunch. I'm pretty sure out of memory, I thought it says it in the original calming policy, maybe even the board bill that references that policy of whenever they have those little definitions of what it means. But I mean, there's diverters, you can change directions of streets, you can have different physical features in the road. They got fancy things, and this is the things that are pretty hard to afford. They have things called chicanes, which are raised concrete that basically take a street and do this to it, so it's not a straight shot through. Traffic circles was where we had long stretches of streets that were, actually, I think in your ward, we had one at Pierce and North Point. That was one where people were just coming off of, was that West Florissant and shooting straight through at long speeds. So we could have looked at, that's another example where we could have done speed humps down that one stretch, but it said, well, is that going to slow them down? Well, coming through that intersection where I think they've actually crashed into a house there at that intersection was where, from memory there, we put a traffic circle in the middle, which in the center of an intersection didn't have it before. It was a stop sign, but people just went straight through and didn't stop. Well, what stops someone from going straight through when there's something in the middle? So these traffic circles were built not to be a roadblock, but to divert you physically enough where you're not making a degree turn around it, but it's enough to make you slow down. It's a physical enough deflection off to the side to get where you're going that you have to go around, which slows you down. But that's another classic traffic calming item that's in that toolbox. So there is a bunch of things in the toolbox. From memory, I don't know how that got to Mimica or what was discussed back then, but regardless of what was picked from that toolbox, I think if humps was a thing and didn't work out, then we should be able to go back and look at what can work out. Let's try the next thing. If that was our best bet back then, as far as the first thing to implement, maybe it was one of the cheaper things to implement. Let's see if it works, and let's go up as we go up in cost, up in the feature, and see what we can do to really zone in on what the issue is. So I'd be absolutely willing to sit down and go through Mimica and see what's a better solution for that.
And I guess my thing is, like Alderwoman Tyus said, if we going through the processes, we having the residents do the petitions, they're signing the petitions, they're agreeing that the speeding is a problem. And like I said, one street even went to a point where they had pictures of showing property damage. And so, and then it was an ordinance passed to say this street should be made one way. None of that occurred. We didn't get the one-way, we didn't get the speed humps, we didn't get anything. And so my question is, now they're coming back, BPS is coming back and say, well, Alderwoman, now you have to pay $900. Well, why would I have to pay $900? And we've been talking about this for 2 years. So it never happened from the beginning, and that's what I'm not understanding. Even though you hiring people to do the job, which is kind of weird to me, and we have to pay. When I say we, it's not my money, it's the residents' money. They have to pay because the city doesn't have the staff. And so we have to pay to get somebody to do this process all over again when it was already done and nothing happened. So I'm just kind of confused. I don't understand.
I'm absolutely going to have to dig into Mimica with you between us and talk, not to take away from this whatsoever, but in order to have a real discussion about that, I'm going to have to dig in and see what happened back then and talk specific to that. I don't want to speak in generality. I want to give this the full attention it deserves.
All right, thank you.
We'll set something up, Zach. We'll set something up with you, and the three of us will go over this.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Bosley.
Thank you. since I've been an alderperson, I think one thing that is really, really common amongst all departments is the shortage of personnel. And I think with us not working at capacity most of the time, it leaves some people up to doing multiple jobs, so we don't really get things done in an expeditious manner. But with that being said, and that being a common trait, and you are not personnel, so this is not necessarily on you, but I think what you said earlier was very important as far as you are thinking towards the future and thinking about maintaining the things that we're putting in place now with something that we want, right? I think that goes hand in hand with ensuring that we have the right amount of employees or the right people trained for that particular job when it comes down to that being something that we have to explore in the future, right? If we know that that's going to be something that'll be something that may be a common issue because we have them all across the city right now, it's not an issue, but this is something that's new to St. Louis, not new to other states. Of course, it's been around for years and years, so other maintenance plans already exist. So it'd be something for us to look into right now and train the right individuals or ensure that we have people that are already prepared to maintain these things before they get to a point to where they're deteriorated. But those same individuals that we train to maintain them, I think, and maybe once again, I'm not the streets director, and these could be two very, very different jobs, but I would think can go, actually they are two very different jobs. But once we put enough street humps in, of course, you might not have to do street studies anymore. So my question is, one, why can't we this has been going on for 4 years, correct, since 2016, if I remember correctly?
Yes.
I believe you said it was somewhere around 340-something street studies have been done. It's about $300,000, give or take, of course, a little bit more than that, but just as a point, about $300,000. I think over the last 4 years, we could have hired 2 people at $40,000 a year and still had some money left over to do those street studies, and whatever equipment was needed, we probably could have purchased that also and had this thing streamlined. And not even have to deal with outside companies. It'd be an internal job, and once we got to capacity with those people who are doing street studies, we could be training those same individuals to go out and maintain or work with the streets department to identify those ones that need to be maintained. But I think if we're not thinking about what it is that we can do to ensure that you have the right amount of employees doing the jobs that are important that we want done. If we see that we all want street humps, this is something that's out of control. It's only out of control because everybody wants them,
Right.
So, and you are thinking ahead as far as an exit plan, but, we need an entrance also into why is this getting out of hand? And I think that is all getting to the street study thing. That's what's backing us up. Why can't we not train our own individuals for that job?
Yeah, and thank you for acknowledging the vacancy issue that we have, and I hate saying it because it sounds like just an excuse of why we can't get this stuff, and I don't like that, but I also don't like making promises I can't live up to. So when we're short on people, I don't want to keep promising things I can't deliver. So it comes up naturally, organically when we talk about this type of stuff. It's virtually like you got 4 guys going out to a job and one of them's not there. I mean, it's real. And it's one thing to talk about, it's real for the folks that are out there doing this. So when you're that 4th and 5th guy out of 5 is gone, that's a real thing when it comes to doing things, and it just staggers of what you steal from one task, or steal is a bad word, but you borrow guys that do this, they do this, which means they just ignore that and they get back to that, and it's effectively chasing their tail, and something inevitably gets dropped, and then it's again something that we're not able to live up to the city, to the citizens, to you guys. So I don't mean that as an excuse, but I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up that type of thing that does factor into how we make these decisions. I tried to cut it back and say we didn't do that. So yeah, it'd be great if we had a budget, more of a budget to have the manpower to do the studies, to be able to keep up with the pace of it.
Well, I think we got the budget. We just spent $300,000 over the last few years. We should
not all
have
those.
it.
So probably and Rich, I hate speaking for Rich. What's been paid for consultants to speed studies, I don't know. We did those through May of 19. So all those 300, I bet I don't know, maybe if there was 304, maybe 300 of those were done internally, so there was no, it was zero cost. It was us doing it. So it's only what I guess they're doing recently here will be what the costs are, because we were eating those, so I said we couldn't keep up. But so I didn't have the budget to staff up for those people. The guys that do that are the guys that do this, you know, they repair cameras, they repair fiber, they repair traffic signals, they repair everything under the sun. They put up the speed radar signs that you guys buy. So they're like a jack of all trades, and their work is job security. It's always there because always something's breaking that they need to get back around to with the size of the city and, you know, having 5 technicians run around the city doing this type of stuff. So I do say, yeah, if the staff were more than that, maybe we'd have more to keep up with it. And you maybe weigh that to what it costs for doing the studies. I haven't actually looked at the different numbers of what that particular class of employee would cost the city versus having somebody do the speed studies. I haven't looked at that yet, honestly, but absolutely something to look at.
Well, I would think, you know, if we're going to pay for it, and it's, especially if it's a study, and there could be some objection to whether or not we want them, that's money lost, even though, you know, some would say, well, we got the study done. Neighbors don't necessarily understand that, and sometimes they don't want to hear it because they stand on their block and they see the cars fly past. So, you know, and the speed bumps aren't the, you know, all in. You know, if we get those, it's going to save everything because people speed right up to them, go slow over them, and speed right up to the next one. So we know,
Right.
you know, but it does calm the neighbors down to some degree.
Yep.
Because
Yeah,
after
for
they
sure.
get those for a while, they want something else, but at least bare minimum, they can see that, you know, because it does work for some streets. You know, we can't negate that,
absolutely,
but for
yeah.
others, of course, I
Yeah.
think the longer and wider ones that look more like a highway, it's more of an issue. As far as your employees go, how many of them are you short right now that could be doing this type of work?
I'd have to look at where we are, so if I'd have to look at look at 3 requests per week now, but maybe project what it's gonna be. So like, when I first would have looked back a couple years ago, it was 1 a week to 2 week to 3 weeks. So if we looked at it now, we'd have to look, make sense what you project that maybe in a couple years would be. So I have to look at that, honestly, I haven't looked at it. You know, if
Right.
it's a couple, 2, 3 more guys, I don't know.
Right, no, I'm saying, how many are you short right now? Because you said you had to take
I might have
guys from one
one vacancy
job.
short in our 5 technicians, but that's for doing all those different things, so, I mean.
So just one, though?
Yeah, so even if I had 5, I don't believe I would still keep up, so it would have to be additional to keep up with. There's no predicting, well, we had kind of an idea it was gonna be pretty popular, but I had no idea it was gonna be this many traffic calming requests.
Understood. So, do you know or have an idea of how many we are backed up right now? Or how many, all the people may be waiting, how many requests are waiting, how many streets are?
Not offhand. Rich may have a better grip on that because once it's agreed upon and you guys have the money that's checked, it goes to the speed study, which is now being farmed out to the consultants. So I don't know what their backlog is right now, honestly.
So after it goes to the speed study, company,
So-
then they send it back to you?
No,
Does it go
so
to
we're out. So
BPS?
basically, besides me as a street director at the street department having the authority over the streets, once it goes to a speed study for the consultants, then it's with BPS through their on-call consultants. Once it's deemed that it is warranted, then it goes through BPS for construction as well through the citywide contractors.
Understood. Okay.
So as far as the backlog on the studies or what is warranted and going to be constructed, that'd be something Rich would have to speak towards.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Sure.
Alderwoman Middlebrook.
I have no question.
Jamie, so how's it being tracked from the time the alderman makes the request through the process of getting the speed study approved by the alderman to installation? Is anybody tracking that, or are we just punting it off to BPS, then it's BPS?
It's something that could be tracked. I've not looked at the average time from inception to when those are implemented. It is something I'm sure we can do. It's 350 requests from when it's first sent in as a request to when it's actually physically constructed. I can't imagine, I'm just speculating if it's now to a speed study to, it depends. And there's when you actually asphalt, you don't do it, when it's like today and you don't do it when it's cold. So, and just like paving, you try to keep it during warm temperatures for the best product, best chance of a product that lasts longer. We could literally do it today, and it would fall apart in the months to come here. So generally, that stuff's done in the spring through summer, and try to cut it off before it starts getting cold for the year. So maybe it's, you know, you're doing 8 months of the year, or 6 months of the year you want to do it. So that would affect your time frame of when your request came in. But we'd have to look. Honestly, I don't. From inception, maybe it's a year to when you first put it in, do the study, gets put in the citywide contractors who are doing a ton of stuff. I don't know unless you change the priority of how they do things. Citywide contractors have citywide stuff to do, so it's a long list of things with sidewalks.
So since it's important that we make decisions based on data, I think that's the most responsible way for us to make the most effective decisions. I would like to see, since the inception, if you have the data, from the time the request was made to installation, on what's installed currently.
Okay.
Also, what's currently in the queue that's waiting.
Okay.
From whether it's sitting at, waiting on Alderman approval, or it's out to the consultant for the study. Okay.
Okay.
If you can get that, I think it would be very helpful. You get that to me, I can get it for the whole city, of course, right? So
Okay.
then I'll get that out to every alderman, not just alderman on the committee. Radar boxes. I was wondering how the studies were being done, because I know I'm used to seeing the ropes across the street or whatever.
Yeah, there's various ways you can do it.
But we have radar boxes.
Yeah, there's several ways to do it. You could have a radar gun standing, and but again, so if you have a radar gun, you have to sit on the side of the street in your car and do that type of thing, but it's just a sampling, so you're not going to literally have someone sitting there for 24 hours a day for 2 days doing that. So it's as good as the data you're going to get. So it's spot study type stuff, which is, there again, plays towards your confidence towards the data you're getting. And I mean, again, to geek out on this, but you may hit a good stretch of people driving down the street that live there that are driving a speed limit, and you just calculated that your street has no speeding problem because you picked like the best citizens that came by. Or on the flip side, you could have picked the worst ever that just cruised through, and you're going to say that everybody does 100 miles an hour. So you're getting what you're paying for on that. When we have another option is those radar boxes, they look like a big shoebox. We just strap them to a pole, point them in the direction of traffic. It actually picks up one lane each direction, so it's tilted towards the nearest lane, picks that up, and then picks the opposing direction of traffic out. That's, I think, probably the easiest to do in a city setting like we have, because if we got a block, which typically these traffic calming requests come in as a block, look at the 4600 block or something, we'll go in, I'll pick a good section mid-block to do it, get away from the stop, so you get people in as free flow as it gets within a block, and then you just pick mid-block where the nearest light pole is. There's always one pretty close there, strap it to there, point it to the direction of traffic, set it for a couple days, come back, bring it back to the office. You just download the stuff, and actually the software that comes with the box provides you with what the speed study report. So it's point and click.
Jamie, how
you
many
get your
days are you
results.
leaving the box out?
Well, that can vary. I mean, it's your confidence level. So if I did it, I'd want at least a couple days. Like when you're in the traffic world, I look at, like when you do traffic counts, for example, you can take a full week, but generally you have influences from the weekend on Mondays and Fridays. The weekends are kind of bad. They're usually lower in some places. So I wouldn't call that your average daily traffic on a weekend or a Friday or a Monday. So generally, nationally, internationally, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday represent your best typical days for gathering traffic data. So I would center in on those type of 3 days and whatever's available. If I had no requests going, I would probably be able to leave it out for 3 days. If I have 3 other requests I got to do, and I at least want to do a couple studies a week, I might abbreviate that and just have a day or two on a study, for example. So, but then the hoses are also another. Back to your original, hoses are one way to do it. That's a little more labor intensive with 2-3 people going out there. The radar box that we do, one guy can go out and do it.
So with the radar box, is it not programmed where they can do a daily count, or is it just aggregate over the time it's set out there?
It breaks it down by, I think it bins the data by 15-minute intervals, but Basically, it sits it out there, and it'll, no, yeah, I take that back. That's more traffic. The radar counters will hit every single car, and it gives you a range in columns of from 1 mile an hour to 4 miles an hour, from 5 miles an hour to 7 miles an hour. So it's got columns that break down every bit of speed from every single car that comes through, gives you totals for all those speed ranges, and then it gives you the 85th percentile.
Right, but what I'm asking, Jamie, if you put the box out there for a week, and let's say you started on Monday, and you ran it to Sunday, will that box tell you on Wednesday, between this time and this time, you know, the traffic average speed was X?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
So if we were going to make the most responsible decision, 2 days could potentially not be effective. If you put it out there on Tuesday through Thursday, I'm just thinking about my neighborhood, and thinking about the weather as well, because that impacts, people tend to want to get out and drive and.
Right, we wouldn't do it during bad, yeah, to your point, yeah.
So I'm thinking, you go out there Tuesday through Thursday, now this is the hypothetical, and so it looks like it doesn't warrant it. But then if you was out there over the weekend, you would see there's a high volume of speeding. So I'm concerned about how we pick the particular days. And I think that we need to have a very consistent policy that maximize the study and not just, you know, I think it's minimized when you pick a few days.
It does.
That's me, and I'm not an engineer.
And it's, yeah, if I had a choice, I would zone in on, for the time frame we're given, I would get the best I could out of those 3 typical days. But to get the best picture of a street and a neighborhood and a ward, I would use it for a week, you know, and you can see, maybe it doesn't factor into changing the result of the X percent of speed on this route is this. It will, by those speed ranges I gave, show you that in the 61 mile an hour to 66 mile an hour, there's like 10 people that do that every Saturday or every whatever. So it lets you identify some things that are so far out of the curve that it draws your attention. So statistically, it didn't factor into changing your average, but it is an outlier that gives you a point of order of magnitude of an issue that you may have, where the people driving 70 are the guys that jump into the yard and into the house type thing, versus somebody that's 6 miles an hour over the speed limit, for
And
example.
how many of those boxes do we have?
We only have 1 or 2 in the city.
How much do they cost?
They're a couple $1,000s, I think.
Okay.
It wasn't as much the equipment's fairly cheap, it's just having people run out and doing it.
That's not bad.
But if you had the people to do it, but you didn't have the boxes, that wouldn't help. Seemed like to me we need more boxes. That would maybe helpful. Maybe, I'm not an engineer again, but 12 maybe, but 1 or 2, that doesn't seem to be a lot. Because if it doesn't take time to run out there and put it up, I mean, maybe one guy can put up 10 a day. I don't know. What do you think? If you had 12 boxes, how many
Yeah, you
could
could
one
put all
person
out, just
put
a single guy. I mean,
Okay.
most of them are, like I said, mid-block and get a
So
ladder
you can
out
get
and
more
up there.
studies done
Right.
if you have more boxes. Okay.
With more people.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna have Rich Bradley come up.
That was all for questions?
Right.
Okay.
For now. Okay, sure.
I'll come up here so that it's recorded. We have to share this.
I don't know all the rules.
Okay, that's all right, but I'm just saying. Okay, I have a question. Who installs the speed humps?
Citywide contractor.
A citywide contractor. And approximately how much do speed humps cost?
I don't want to quote them.
Okay.
2,500, 3,000, I don't know.
Okay.
Somewhere around there.
So, and,
Oh, you guys know, do you know what?
Yeah, I was going to say, that one street of mine was very wide. I think it was 2,500.
Okay.
okay. So, and are you getting the calls for speed humps on mostly residential areas? Is that what the call, or do you know that?
Most have been residential, yeah.
Because you exclude major streets, bus routes, and things like that, right?
Right, and nationally, speed humps are for lower speed routes. You don't put them on the highway, you don't put them on places people drive a certain speed limit, because when we, I don't even know if I'm using the word, I'm sorry. So, when you put them on a street, on a 25 mile an hour street, it doesn't actually take the guy that's going 30 or 35 and make them go 25. They have to go lower than 25 to actually comfortably, as designed, go over it. So as such, you don't put it on a street that someone, by speed limit, is driving 40 miles an hour, and they're good. You don't put it there to stop the guy that's going 50, because now you just took a 40-mile-an-hour guy by speed limit to go, 12 miles an hour over it. So it would be a complete breakdown of the street, that classification of a street, to have a speed hump in the middle of that and slow, if it's on Tucker, we've got one, and people are coming there. Whatever it is, you don't want to put it on a higher class road than it's intended. So that application, speed humps would not be a good fit for a classification road greater than a residential street.
And can we put speed humps in alleys also?
We have implemented the alley bumps, which are the, where you just bolt down, they're a little wider, they're shorter, so it's a little more abrupt. The speed humps are 14 feet wide, and you go up, you go down, more gradual. For the alleys where it's 10 or 15 miles an hour speed limit, you can get away with being a little more abrupt in that bump, and they're much easier. I think those are only a couple $100 to put those down, to bolt them down.
And is the holdup, when we're talking about, is the holdup both with a number of employees, the study itself, is it also a holdup in implementation and installing the speed humps themselves? Is the company behind in being able to install?
The humps?
Yes.
That Rich would have to speak towards citywide contractors, their backlog, I have no clue.
You don't know the?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's all the questions I have for you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sure.
For me?
Yes, for
Okay.
Jamie.
You guys just don't want me to sign this
I'm
paper,
sorry.
do you?
Maybe this is, well, I'm gonna ask anyway. So why can't you use the alley humps for speed humps? Just a thought, since they're a little bit,
Well, that would actually be a speed bump, and I think legally, to use them on our roads, humps are allowed, bumps are not. So
Okay.
the application of humps it all played into those words I was using before with, it's a more gradual incline and decline. Abrupt is what you would see with the speed bumps, and that would cause, my opinion, would cause more problems and solutions if we had something as abrupt as something you see in a parking lot. It's more towards what is the design speed of the road. If it's a 10 or 15 mile an hour parking lot, it's schnooks, or an alley, those type of things are more appropriate. Putting those in a 25 mile an hour street would not be.
okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
No more questions?
Just stand by. Rich Bradley, if you don't mind, come up, tell everybody who you are, what you do for the city.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee. Rich Bradley, President of the Board of Public Service. Just want to talk briefly about the BPS involvement with the traffic calming. The Director of Streets talked in detail about different things pertaining to his department. The way the process was set up was that an alderperson came to the ward liaison, who holds the ward capital funding for them. They contacted Streets, made the request for a speed study. The speed study was completed, yay or nay. If it was yay, it came to BPS. We assigned it to a contractor. Notice to proceed was issued. Contractor built them. Just a little bit of detail about that. So currently, Currently, we've completed about 30 notice to proceeds for speed humps in construction, which have had multiple humps in them. So not just 30, probably on the order of 100, 150. And so to date, looking at the history of the construction time, the average construction time is about 3 months once we get the approval, got the approval from Streets. There are onesie, twosies that have taken longer if they were issued in the wintertime. If we had an issue with a resident who said, I don't want that in front of my house and I'm not going to move my car, which happens a few times. But for the most part, we were around 3 months would be an average to get them in construction. We assigned those to our citywide contractor. It was an ongoing contract. To go through the city process and advertise and go out to bid would take an exceptional amount of time to do. So the street department actually came to us some time ago and said, we no longer have the capacity to do the speed studies because there are so many of them. So we need you guys to hire consultants to do this. So we went out, We advertised, went through the consultant selection process, which is all dictated by ordinance, and we selected 3 consultants, which are CBB, Lockmiller, and WSP, all local firms to do speed studies, which the director talked about. Currently, there are 115 locations for speed humps that we're waiting to assign to these 3 consultants to get done. As soon as, we can get approval from the Board of Aldermen for the funding of those, we'll get those farmed out. My estimation would be is sending these out to consultants, they would have about a month or less to get a location speed study done. They would get it to us. We'd assign it to a contractor. My hope would be is within a couple of 3 months, we could get a speed hump put in place. If we can't, then we certainly need to look at our process and see what we need to do a little better, because we do understand that you guys are under the gun to perform for your constituents. I always get a lot of questions about why it takes BPS so long to get things done. And the answer to that is the process. And so I walk through this with a lot of people many times. And when I go through the process, I talk about all the advertising and the transfers and all the paperwork that's necessary for us to get this stuff done. And it is extremely bureaucratic and cumbersome. However, it's the process that we're tied to do. So just a little bit on the speed study, in my personal opinion. Jamie and I are both licensed professional engineers in the state of Missouri. We both carry a professional engineering license, and the charter states that the 2 of us need to do that. We need to be able to approve engineering design documents, which we do, and so we're qualified to do that. Speed studies, just like anything that we put in the public right-of-way, is a result of engineering analysis, and that is for a couple of reasons. Primarily for liability and public safety, so that if something happens, there's an accident or a result of an accident or a problem, that we can come back on an engineering document and we can show a court of law that we've done diligence to do all the things that we're supposed to do to justify that. The other reason is, in my opinion, is justification to our residents. And, people start asking why we've spent money to do different things and so forth. And for you folks, if people ask, well, why can't I have 4 speed humps on my street? The easy answer is because the engineering people who determine what is proper along with reasonable standards of engineering in government agencies have told us that that's not a reasonable thing to do. So it provides a coverage for liability for all of us as well to do that. I do hear the alderperson with the comments about time, and I understand that very well. And I'm continuously on to my staff about pushing things along to get done because, again, as Alderman Bosley stated, the residents typically don't understand speed studies and engineering designs, and nor should they have to. They just need to know the end result is what's right for them. So that is my presentation. I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have for me.
Okay, Alderwoman Murphy.
No, I would just reiterate that, so we do the speed study. Like I said, I like the idea of having the objective data, or I'm afraid they would just be everywhere. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that we need that as far as like doing our due diligence for, because a lot of people don't like the speeds, even on don't like the humps. So I'm glad that, that you mentioned that doing the due diligence for.
And we do get quite a few complaints from the residents when we put them in. It's like a fire plug. Nobody wants it in front of their house. They want it, but they don't want it there.
Right.
And if the speed hump's okay, they don't want the sign that goes along with it, because
Yes.
that has to go somewhere as well. And the other piece I failed to mention, and I apologize, is the cost of construction of one speed hump today is just shy of $4,000. And that is actually a negotiated cost we've negotiated with our citywide contractor. And that's all in. That is the milling, that is the installation of the hump, that's the striping and the sign. And I'm very confident that if we went out and put this out to bid, that we would see prices probably in the $5,000 to $6,000 range. But because it's lumped into this contract and they do a substantial amount of other work, there's not very much overhead placed on top of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No more questions.
Okay, Alderwoman Pam Boyd.
So what I'm hearing is this. The bill that's before us, you are saying that, no, you're justifying what she's saying, that you don't have the staff and that you can't get to do the work because of the shortage of staff. And so it's a time frame that we're working with because we don't have the staff to do what needs to be done. So technically, you're really saying, she's saying is right, we don't need the study. We can't do the study because we don't have the staff, and it's too costly because now it's going to come to the residents because that's tax dollars we're using to pay for them to do the study.
Actually, no. I agree that we need to do this study because it's engineering justification and liability coverage. Who does the study? It could be streets if they had the personnel to do it. They don't, so the option is rather than let these all just sit forever, we hired consultants and we negotiated that $900 a hump fee with them as a reasonable cost. They actually, a couple of the firms wanted higher than that. We took the lower of the cost and we said, if you want to do this for us, you will meet this cost. And so I do think we need the speed study, whether it's done by streets or the consultant. I think it's necessary.
So I guess my question again is, if you all felt we need the street study, because I don't know about the other Alder people here, I'm speaking for myself. I was blown out the water when my BPS person said, well, Alderwoman, it'll cost you to do that. And so I guess I'm kind of concerned because now I'm hearing a change in a policy that nobody informed me of. Now I have to pay for it. Well, the citizens have to pay for it because it's their money. So they have to pay for this to be done. And so I just think that it's a lot of holes there because to me, it was no consideration to tell us that, oh, beginning March 1st, this is what happened because of this, to give those older people an opportunity to say no or yes, or for us to say we need to come back to streets to see what needs to happen to make another ordinance. And so I think that's the challenge that I'm having with it. I understand what you all are saying, and it seems like that's the norm excuse for all departments. We don't have the staff, so we have to contract out, but at the end of the day, we are, as elected officials, responsible for these residents' money, and so we're trying to figure out, okay, so how are we going to pay for this, but we didn't even know it was a cost in the first place, and that's my concern with it.
So I think this is very similar to what happens in BPS when you come for a street project, a sidewalk, a playground, an alley, or anything else that you typically do. If it is a small enough project and my staff can handle something, a lot of times we will try to do it in-house to save you that design cost up front. This, in my opinion, is a case of where street department tried to take something on, it ballooned into something way more than what they had personnel to do. They were getting behind the 8 ball on it. You were getting complaints from your constituents. Nothing was moving fast, and so they asked us for assistance, like same as I would ask my design staff to do if they couldn't handle a design project for you. So yes, it is a new cost. I don't know that the policy specifically says the street department completes a speed study. It may. But again, whether it's done in a street department and we find more people to work over there, or whether it's done by a consultant, what I agree with the alderperson is we need to get them done, and we need to be able to turn them around and get them back out on the street. I'm not, debating that part whatsoever. I just think that we need to do the speed studies for the liability aspect and the justification aspect. How we get to that point is a matter of debate.
Thank you.
Sorry. The original intent of the traffic calming policy was to farm out those speed studies, and we're probably streets is probably a victim of what we created before. We tried to say, we didn't own those black boxes that we put up on the thing. We didn't own those before. We said, well, man, that's just a speed study. That's easy to do. We're going to do those ourselves. So instead of farming those out originally, we took it on ourselves. Like, we can turn that around. We can save some time on this. ironically. So we took that on ourselves. We bought those things and we did them. And then we got to a point now where, crap, it's a lot more. There's a lot more to do than we can keep up with. So that's when we backed off to, ironically, like I said, what the original intent was to send that out to somebody else to do, to be able to keep on top of it, so. And I apologize for the shift in the way we do those, how that may have gotten out to you guys. I can do better on that communication, and I will. I'm sorry if that caught folks by surprise. Well, it did catch you by surprise, but I apologize for that, and that's something that internally I will work on doing a better job on that communication.
Thank you.
You good?
Yeah, I'm fine,
Okay.
thank you.
Alderman Bosley?
Thank you. Good morning. So I heard you say you actually think the street studies are, the speed studies are important. Well, let me not say important. You said you agree with the fact that they need to be done. I am not an engineer, so I pick things up very well, though. So I would like an idea of why, because I'm trying to wrap my head around the importance of it. I do get you saying that there needs to be some engineering justification. And I understand the design, as far as it being engineered in a way to where that will not be an issue and cars won't, end up in the sky, but as far as the, engineering justification for having one, I think just being able to see people speed down the street, or just people in general, is almost like saying you want your street paved, right? If I just paved the street last year, regardless of if the street looks good or not, if, we have the funding and the residents want it, if they want the street to look brand new, maybe you say we can just seal it. Maybe they say we don't want it sealed again. We want to waste our money. I mean, and that's, sometimes you have to look at things like that, because those are the people who vote and the individuals who have ultimately the power, because as soon as things don't get done in a way, then we have to, deal with that backlash. And of course you all deal with that when we have to come and, try to figure out why is this not working, because I'm getting yelled at over this way. So I'm just saying all that to say, what is the justification of the actual speed study itself? I know that we need to know how many people are speeding down the street, right? But what is the downfall of not having one? Let's say, for instance, that 0 people speed down the street and some older lady on a block just feels comfortable sitting on her block, drinking a lemonade, knowing that there's a speed hump right there. It just makes her feel better, right? What is the downfall of not having one, and why is having one important?
So the speed hump to me would be similar to a traffic signal, which requires warrants in order to justify its existence. So for example, if you put in a speed hump, right, you could put in 1, 5, 10, you could put in as many as, your heart desires. The question would be for justification, in my opinion, is if someone came back and said, well, nobody ever speeds down that street. I've never seen anybody speed down the street. Why did you put the speed hump in? Or even worse, in my opinion, is every constituent in your ward would say, well, Alderman, they have one, I want one. And your budget couldn't allow that. And so what it does is it gives you a basis for saying to them, well, we need to look at it and we need to determine if it's appropriate to actually put in there. At the end of the day, I think we all know that we'd probably like to have one of these on every side street. The problem would be is whether the budget could afford, your work capital budget could afford to do that. So, it's
I don't want to cut
justification
you
for
off.
the installation as well.
I don't want to cut you off. I'm speaking personally from an engineer's perspective, right? And reason being is we run into that issue on a regular basis as far as not having funding for this or that. And we have our residents ask regularly, why does the Central West End have these big pillars, and why does it look like this, right? And we can easily say it's our ward, capital, we don't have the funding. We can say that, that business district helped put in funds to offset some of the costs. They went into some type of, maybe that's a private street reason. point that I'm making is that is a regular thing that happens amongst, especially when you go north and south. We all know about the Delmar Divide. That's something I don't even have to dig into. You can blatantly see the differences between who has funding and who does not, right? I have the second geographically largest ward in the city, and we all get the same amount of money every single year to do capital improvements. And being realistic, it's impossible for me to make my ward look like some other wards because I can spend $300,000 on streets easy and still not hit even 30 of them, right? And I have over 100, 150 blocks while some other people have 50 or 60. So, that's not that older person's fault that they have a smaller ward and people want to live closer together and the population is more dense. But at the end of the day, the offset of that is my ward is much larger. People are not densely located together, so it takes much longer or much more money to affect each and every resident. I might have 3 residents on the block, and my justification for saying that street needs to be paved is they want it paved, right? And it might be 50 other people on another block, but these 3 ask first, right? Now economically, it would make sense for me to go take care of those 50, right? But maybe those 3 on that block been there for 30 years, and it used to be all houses on that block. So I have to put into, my thought process of who is there first, how important they are to the neighborhood, what they have been through, being in the neighborhood, watching the houses go down. If it brings value to their house, paving the street, these 20 or these 50 people, they'll, if they can wait, all of those things have to come into, effect. So I when it comes down to, I think, small things like this, and to me it is small because it's not, from the explanation you just kind of gave, and I'm sure you had more to say, it wasn't a negative to not having the study, right? It's more so like like you said, if they can't get it or they can get it, why can't we? And I think we can justify that very easily. I say it all the time because they have a little bit more funding or they have business, whatever the real justification is, it never comes back to BPS. Right? We can blame BPS all day, but the residents don't even know what BPS stand for, some of them. And even then, they're not going to point the finger at Rich Bradley. They're not going to point the finger at anybody. They're going to be like, we asked you to get it done. Why can't you do it, right? And it seems simple enough because it's just a speed hump. So I just kind of want it on record as far as from an engineering perspective. We can deal with the monetary part. We know every ward can get it. I know half of the constituent in my ward, I tell them all the time, the ones who ask, hey, you are in line with other people. And you have to understand that everybody is going to get them based on design also, because I would like to put them around all the parks first, where it will affect most of the kids, where everybody comes and congregates. So that's going to take away from putting them in residential places. But I can tell them why and justify that. Like, that's up to me to be like, I put them here and chose. That's on my head. So if election time come back and I got those 50 mad at me and I only got those 3 voting, that's on me. I made that decision. So I'm just saying, from an engineering perspective, if they did not exist, if this speed study was not something that we needed, how would it affect the city in general and us as auto people saying, like, we already know the restrictions. We don't want them on bus lines. We don't want them where the dump trucks will be coming. We don't want them to our snow plows. We understand that, right? From an engineer, if we followed those rules to ensure that there will be no, as mechanical problems or anything structural, why or what would be the, negative effects from just saying, well, let's do away with the street study altogether?
Right.
And just document where we put them.
I certainly can't talk about every case in the city because every street is different. I don't think there are 2 that are identical. And so the answer to that question would be tough for me specifically. But I believe, again, it's like, and I can defer to Jamie, he may have a better answer than I do, but I think that it's like traffic signals. I think you have to look at every individual location and you have to understand, and yes, it is a speed study to determine whether or not people are actually speeding down the street. But I believe there are other variables that are probably included with that as well. And I think we would have to look at those in conjunction with, after that first qualifier of whether or not it even makes the cut or not to get one. So do you have anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, excuse me. There's probably a number of things I could think of. I'll probably think of even more when I leave. But before I answer the part about the hump, yeah, there's guidelines on traffic signals, stop signs, all this type of stuff to help the engineering community itself govern itself, and then provide some sort of division between I mean, you guys may have the best intentions in the world of a speed hump application, but in the future, there's an alderman that's not even born yet that's going to come out and say, well, we need him every single block, you know? I mean, so it's things we have to think of. Again, you guys could have the best application in the world, home run, justified. We didn't end up needing a study because visually we saw that speeding problem was solved. It's going to get abused somewhere, and that's why some of these things like the stoplight example, you may fix that the side street now gets out every time because you stop main line. They may find out on an unwarranted signal, and you end up causing an accident, and legally, you lose your claim when the person sues you. Like, why is that traffic signal even there? It's not even warranted. It's a slam dunk, you're losing that case type thing. Stop sign's probably something similar. A hump, I'm just looking down the road, not to beat the drum on the maintenance side, but when we don't have a paving budget, we have a patching budget that keeping up with 300 traffic speed humps, patching, I don't even know how we're going to do that, but say one doesn't, as your streets fall down, as we get potholes, as perhaps in this, if we're talking about potential scenarios of where this could be a downfall of not having a speed study, I would say maybe a hump breaks down over time with that freeze thaw I'm talking about. In a couple years, that hump turns into 1/3 of a hump, and it's deformed, and somebody comes cruising through and hits, trips, ends up hitting God bless you, it hits a street light right next to it, that falls down, accident. I'm sure I could paint 100 different scenarios, I guess, but my point is, on an unmaintained hump, it may create a scenario where there is an accident, and like that traffic light example I said, some lawyer is going to look back and say, well, let's do our due diligence, and how did that thing even get put in the street? Because when they go look at it, they'll look around and they'll see that thing and be like, that's just about where the skid started, and they start connecting the dots, and they go back in the paper trail and found out, well, that just got put in for no reason. I mean, it just got put in to be put in, and they're like, well, I'm going to write that on one of my things that potentially caused someone some injuries or fatalities or whatever. Legally, you probably have a claim there, and I'm not just saying we only worry about getting sued, but as the guy on the front line for the actual street itself of what happens, whether it's a speed hump or a traffic light or a stop sign, I'm the guy they come back to. So when the lawyer does come back, or the person comes back, the family comes back, anybody comes back, it doesn't even have to be a legal case. I don't want to play that scenario, but it could be. I'm the guy that answers those questions. And when I say, well, that hump was put in for, I look around and there's nobody behind me, it's just Jamie. And I don't, again, mean you guys at all. I mean, I got to think about the future. The people that aren't even born yet, they're going to be alder persons. And they may put one in every block, and I got to answer for it all of a sudden. So it's not professionally responsible to me at all to allow things like that, whether there's a traffic light, a stop sign, a speed hump, whatever the new thing is that we don't even know about right now that I'm going to have to watch out for. That's on me as my position to be responsible for it. So
Right, and
I do have to think
respectfully-
about those things. So and I don't mean to be long-winded, but back to your question about where some potential downfalls of not having any objective scenario, and I'm not talking about splitting the atom as far as it's 0.1 miles an hour over or under, no speed hump, that type of thing. I think that's something we could still learn as we go here and figure out what's the right threshold for figuring this stuff out before we dismiss the whole policy. I'd like to see if there's something we could do to more compromise on that and have some discussions about this outside of this in a microphone, whether it's the same group or whatever. I'm open to meeting with you guys on that type of stuff. But back to your question as far as what could potentially happen with an unwarranted application, whether it's this hump or any of that other stuff, that's just a scenario that I was just thinking of is on the maintenance side, there's no way, and look at we have potholes places. I mean, I love to say we can clear every pothole out. You know, just because we pave a street doesn't mean that we can keep up with the potholes. Just because we put a hump in doesn't mean we can keep up with every hump. So I'm just trying to paint a scenario, not a too pessimistic one, but I'm also trying to be a realist in some ways because this stuff comes right back to me as the authority for the streets as far as their condition and how they got there.
Right, and that's completely understood, I appreciate that. So it sounds like what you're saying is the potential downfall is that it could just get out of hand and we won't be able to maintain them 5 or 10 years from now. Or
In
3
my
or 4
own
years from now.
personal, professional opinion, I would say if there are no guidelines or regulations on how things get applied, they will be everywhere. I mean, it doesn't have to be my opinion. If we had 350 requests, and 350 requests got 350 humps, we're already over double the amount that are actually installed today.
Right, but I think that's a potential for that to be exactly what you just said in another 2 or 3 years if we continue on the path that we are right now. Even if we hire more contractors, like you said.
Right.
We were overcapacitated, so opposed to us slowing down all the way, all we did was contract the work out. And not getting one contractor, we got 3 contractors to ensure that these things were done in a speedy fashion, and we still can't keep up to some degree, right? So in the event, let's just say as a hypothetical, we hired 5 more contractors, or we just cut contractors out altogether, bought 100 of these speed monitors, put them out all over the city, because from my understanding, from what Alderwoman Tyes just said, if we had one person, we could put 10 out in a day, correct?
Right.
So if we put 10 out in a day, in 30 days, we could have 300 studies out, and maybe in 60 days have them all done with our own equipment, and, you know, have our yays and nays. Once again, I have over 120 blocks. I'm sure all of them, or 200 blocks, I'm sure all of them won't get them. But in the event that we found the need for 100, that's 100 of them regardless of whether we had the speed study or not. So if there are 28 other wards and they have 100, or they have 30 or 40, those numbers will add up regardless whether or not that speed study of theirs. So if the hope or the problem is about the maintenance and maintaining them, I think that should be the focus on your particular end and not necessarily the study, because we're not slowing down the amount of humps we're getting in. It's naturally happening because there's a larger request for them.
Right. I have no argument if it's warranted. I'm not saying for maintenance I don't want to maintain any of them, but I'm also trying to manage, say, well, if we're putting them in, at the very least I want them warranted. You know, otherwise we're making the situation even worse. I'm trying to keep up with the warranted ones for sure. 100% help come up with the policy myself. I'm all for it. I'm just trying to say, if we're putting them in, we should probably have a reason we're putting them in, and that's what we're trying to do.
Right. So I think this looks like you said it's no different from stop signs. Do we do stop sign studies? If we want a stop sign, we just say, hey, man, we want a stop sign. Board of Aldermen, go to streets. You all come if you. And there's another question.
There is an ordinance that specifies, just like a traffic signal, when I said before, there's guidelines for that. In our own city code, it documents.
I know the signal, but the stop signs, right?
What's that?
The stop signs, do we do a stop sign study?
Well, I'm saying, we have been asked in the traffic division to do traffic sign installation warrant studies, and I've looked at them. There's 2-way stop applications and 4-way, and in your city code, it identifies the different thresholds for which a 2-way stop or an all-way stop can be installed.
Right, I understand that, but we don't do a study. It's just like you got to stay within the guidelines.
Mass, I do studies.
Okay, understood. And I don't think it just sounds like it's cut and dry, like the same thing with a street hump. You know, it's just like it's a stop sign before the stop. This is a pre-stop sign.
Right.
You know, so all right, it's another question, and this may be for Rich. Have you done a study that they have come back and said no to, that an alderperson has said, we want this, and you said, we're going to go ahead and do it? And if there has been one, what was the downfall of that?
So I think that there may have been 1 or 2 locations where it was borderline, and it was said no originally. And I think that we talked with the street director, and he said yes. And so I think there is flexibility in that. I think there's always a case where, you know, maybe a speed study doesn't show exactly what the case may be. And, you know, an alderperson may know when they talk with the street director and say, this has been a situation here on and off for 10 years, and I really would like you to consider this. And I think that the 2 of you would be able to work that out to come up with a resolve. I don't think, and you can comment on that, I don't think it's cut and dry. Well, it's barely underneath, so the answer is no, no, no. I think the justification is no, but then there's a consideration.
Yeah, probably should have said, the original traffic calming policy was developed, and we modeled it after a number of different states and different guidelines on how you develop a traffic calming policy locally. Traffic calming, by definition, is a way to combat speeding, cut through traffic volumes, and just address general overall safety of like near a park or a school or types of applications like that. So it's a way to look at all 3 of those different categories. And I'm confused by all those. So let me backtrack 1 second. So traffic calming, by definition, in a neighborhood setting is a way to combat cut-through traffic volumes through streets, getting between two different arterials, cut through a neighborhood, speeding down residential streets, and addressing overall safety of pedestrians, like near a school or a park type of setting. So again, it's not a hump policy, and it's not a speeding policy. It's a traffic calming policy to address all three of those scenarios in a neighborhood setting. So when it gets down to, we have a certain school and a street right in front of it, and 3/4 of school walks to school because it's such a tight district is the way the boundaries are drawn, we look at that, make some observations. Everybody's crossing here, talk to the alderperson, and they're like, yeah, the whole pattern's people cross here, and we got kids out there doing the stop paddles and stuff like that. Well, there's an application where that's not quite the norm of fits the speed criteria. It's not really a traffic cut-through volume thing, but it is directly a school and the safety of the pedestrians, little pedestrians at that, where an application, I'm willing to sit down and look at it. Now, when I look at every street that possibly feeds that street, that feeds that street, that feeds that street to get a speed hump, no, but I would probably look at right where I think would be the best, what would be the right impact to slow traffic down, more on a preventative maintenance type of scenario, preventative situation, where all the kids are crossing type thing. So that would be a school and a park application of 1/3 of what the traffic calming policy is intended for.
Understood. Appreciate it. So I have one last question. So we are contracted out with sidewalks and the speed humps, right?
That's right.
Would it not make sense that we're talking about maintenance, since we're getting, what I would consider, a discounted rate because of all of the other work this contractor does? Would it not make sense to figure out some type of a contractual agreement for the maintenance for them also?
So typically, underneath of our ward capital funds, it's for a capital improvement. It's not typically for the maintenance of an item. And so very seldomly do we do maintenance items in our shop. It would be a remove and replace, and I think what the director here would tell you, it's probably a cut and patch type situation, which really falls underneath his purview. If he would need a contract like that, we could help him do that. The question would be where the funding would come from to do it.
Okay, no further questions. Thank you.
Alderman Middlebrook.
I think I just have more of a comment. The $900 fee that we're going to be charged for a probability is concerning for me. Mainly, I guess, statistics was the hardest course in my life that I took because I have a hard time thinking outside the box. I'm a very concrete thinker. So to spend $900, which may be a lot to some and not so much to others, for a probability is concerning. Was there another way that things could have been done, such as a set fee for each ward to, okay, we're going to charge you $1,200, and this is for your entire ward to go through and see, if this will work for you, versus $900 per study,
Right, per hump.
per hump. That's a little far-fetched, especially seeing that we don't get that much money. I would love to have speed humps on my street, especially seeing that even refuse doesn't stop at the stop sign. My child's bus driver asks all the time, why don't you have your son outside? Because the trash truck might hit him. He's going to stand at the door until the bus comes. When I see the trash truck come and back up and don't stop at all. And I have several cars that come up and down, don't stop. I would think that we, the citizens, are some of the best people to go to as far as what's going on in the street, what they see every single day, and what's important to them. We are the ones who sit out on our porches. We're the ones who have to travel up and down our streets, and we're the ones who see the cars being sideswiped. We're the ones who fear for our kids. And if we feel something, and we go through proper channels such as getting residents to sign, getting residents to take pictures, and we feel that, okay, this may help, you know, $900 a pop is just ridiculous in my eyes. I just think that's far-fetched.
So your comments duly noted, and I appreciate that. And so, again, it goes back to, it's an engineering analysis, goes to an engineering firm, overhead, they have all the different costs here to do this. And again, we think they can complete it in about a month's time. You asked if there was another way to do it. You know, I don't have any traffic engineers on my staff. In fact, I have very few engineers these days. But I would say that, you know, the street department would have designated people on staff to do that. That would take hiring some additional traffic engineering people to do that. And that could be absorbed into the general budgetary cost rather than into capital expense. But at this point in time, in order to get that speed study completed, those are the only two vehicles that I can think of.
Okay,
Can I make one comment?
sure.
I will talk with you afterwards about that trash truck issue, especially if it's reoccurring. Secondly, whether it's a speed study or another example is when an alderperson comes to us and wants to take a look more globally at their ward. Says, I'd like to do a traffic study that kind of looks at general overall pedestrian safety in my ward. That's another thing that we're utilizing their on-call. We have one traffic engineer. He can't do a ward study in all these different wards. Actually, it's not a ward-wide. Usually they're neighborhood studies within a ward, so it's even more defined internal to the ward. Again, that's something I can never keep up with and don't have the ability to do, so that's another example of, and it probably makes more sense that it is kicked off to a consultant who has the horsepower to do that, and you probably don't need us horsepowered up to have, you know, a staff of traffic engineers, full staff like that to be able to absorb. That's probably a good example of when you do kick one out, but I do want to make a general note that wherever we're at with a board bill like this, I'm myself, and I would venture Rich is also available, that both of us be willing to, more than willing to meet with the board bill sponsor, Alderwoman Tyus, and see if there's something we can figure out to improve our policy. We made this policy up in 2016. I feel I personally have learned a lot from this process in 3-4 years. I'm sure Rich would say the same. I'm sure a lot of people involved would say the same as far as what you intend, the way it gets to, in ways to, I think it makes more sense if we learn as we go here and improve than just not change things for the better. So myself, I'm willing, and Rich, I'm sure, is willing to meet with Alderman Ty, see what we can figure out here. If it's nothing, then we end up in the same spot as today. If it's something, then we just improved our traffic calming policy for the whole city, and I think that'd be a benefit.
Okay. So let me give you a scenario. This is for both Jamie and Rich. So there's a speed study done, and it warrants a speed hump, and the alderman has an opportunity to go ahead and pay for it, and it gets installed, correct?
That's right.
So let's say there's a speed study that comes in, and it's unwarranted. Can you still, can the alderman still have that speed hump installed?
So as I mentioned before, you may have been out of the room, my opinion would be if it's borderline, if it's within a close proximity to what the issue would be, and there were notable, cases the alderman knew of, they would simply work with the street director, and the street director would just say, it's okay to do it in this particular location. Now, if people drive the speed limit or below the speed limit, I would think that would not be a justified application, and therefore, it would be up to the street director to decide, but I would assume he would say probably not.
So speak for yourself.
Pretty well said, though, but we do have those, we talk about the speed studies and all that kind of stuff, and that factors in. I talked about the cut-through volume and the pedestrian safety, so a common theme to all three types of things that we're looking at in traffic calming policy is the application of our engineering judgment. So again, I say it's not splitting the atom where it's X amount of miles per, it's X.1 miles an hour
Jamie, I
over
don't
the
mean to
speed
cut you
limit.
off. Yes or no? Just
I
yes or no?
will work engineering, I'm rambling too much. Engineering judgment, I would work with the
Okay,
alderperson for
so
that.
let me ask you this. So let's say you and the alderman can't work it out, right? Because that happens sometime. And the alderman introduces a board bill for the installation of the speed hump. Will it be installed?
It'd be my recommendation not be installed. I'm not the one that I'm not the one that actually contracts the people to build it, though. That'd be on Rich. So he would look at my recommendation, which is not to install it, and then he's the one that has the contractual arm to have the contractor do it. So it can't be built without him notifying them to build it, and he wouldn't notify them to build it, I guess, if it was not my recommendation.
But your recommendation is moot if there's an ordinance that directs it to be done, correct? And maybe we need some legal opinion.
Yeah, I was
but
just- honestly, I
we
was just
do it.
gonna say
And the reason
legally
I
with him,
say
like-
that is because Alderman Bosley is correct, and you said we do have a stop sign policy and it has to meet a certain threshold. But Alderman, and I'm not a big stop sign person. We have a stop sign bill today. And Alderman from the 23rd Ward is the king of stop signs. Not to throw him under the bus, but he is. And I think they're a nuisance oftentimes. But if we do an ordinance, they get installed, right? Okay. So speed humps would be no difference, basically, in my mind. Unless the mayor vetoes it, then it's law. And that it probably should be implemented. I just want to kind of bring that out. But I do want to get a legal opinion about the liability of the humps from the city council's office, because I've heard that, but it doesn't make sense, because if a guy is speeding down the street and he, jumps over to the curb and he hits a car and hits somebody, he did that. The speed hump was there. It was a sign that said it's there. He shouldn't have been speeding, and that person is at fault. So I just don't understand how the city is at fault.
So have you ever heard of a situation where a burglar breaks in a house and injures himself and sues the homeowner and wins? Happens
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah,
And I'm
that-
not an attorney, and I don't want to be.
I have
I'm not
heard
smart
that.
enough to be, but it happens. And so the justification protects us all the way through to show we did diligence to perform professional engineering as required by the state of Missouri in the public right-of-way. Okay? You can do whatever you want in your home or on your property. That's on you. But as a government agency,
Gotcha.
we have to perform professional engineering for everything that we do. It has to be justified.
Yeah, and I believe consistency is very important. I personally don't want to make the call on a speed hump or not. I think a $900, when I saw that sticker price, that shocked me as well. It made me, not want to do any, because I have streets and alleys and other capital improvement needs that I think would be more of a priority, because we have no control over people speeding. I watched them speed right across the speed hump like it wasn't even there, and it's near my house, regrettably. Because here's the other problem. Well, in my neighborhood, it causes me so there's a speed hump by my house. It got away from me, got signed off on, and now the prostitute's staying there. And it's a good location for her to stand there, I guess, because the car, most of them, the overwhelming majority of cars, they do slow down. And so she gets a chance to advertise. So that's a negative reaction for me, having a speed hump. And I don't think I voted for the bill when it first came out, because I didn't want to do the Humpty hump across the neighborhood. Speed hump on every street is just ridiculous to me. And I'm not saying that it exists, but there's a chance. And I think we have to be careful what we wish for, because we're at a problem that I saw 4 years ago or so that we wouldn't be able to keep up, and everybody would want them on their street, but there's a cost associated with which makes it very difficult. So in my logical process in mind, we do have to have some consistencies on how we justify spending the public's dollars at the end of the day. I'm sure if Elliot Davis knew that we were putting speed humps on streets, that the recommendation was not to, it'd be a good story for him, especially if you did about 10 or so. But the big problem that I hear is that, it's taking too long to get this done. The $900 cost for the engineering study seems to be BPS don't seem to be as responsible as the Alderman would want them to be, not to be a slight, but because you're overworked. The street department says, hey, look, we thought we can do this, we want to make it shorter, it ended up being overwhelmed. What I would like to do is, yes, meet with BPS, the Alderwoman from the First Ward, any other Alderman on this committee, and really talk through how we can make policy change that makes sense. Because I'm not in favor of paying, if I had to pay $900 for a study, it better be for a week or two. I mean, just do it for like 2 or 3 days, in my mind, is not enough data for me to make a decision on whether or not this money should move forward. So that's what I would like. I'm going to hold this bill, Alderwoman, and I'll let you, speak at the end, but I'm going to hold it because I want us to make good policy decisions. Here's where I see we getting in trouble long-term with this. And again, I'm not a lawyer, but just like our liquor ordinances that are probably unconstitutional because the fact that they can have a no liquor in this ward and across the street, they can, that doesn't seem fair. And if it goes to court, it probably, be found to be unfair because we have a city and we have these inconsistencies of a policy that should really be citywide. I would rather have, and it's just Jeffrey Boyd, a policy where all the aldermen uses the same process. Like the alderman from the 27th, she says, hey, to get together, alderman from the 1st, you got to get together, you got to have 60%. But some aldermen will just willy-nilly say, I want one, no matter what. And then I'm trying to justify you can't have it because the engineering study says no, but then the alderman across the way, says it doesn't matter, do it anyway. So now I get punished because I'm trying to be responsible, and the other alderman is rewarding constituents because they don't want to hear the complaint. And I get that. It's a balance that we have to do. But at the end of the day, I think that we have to make responsible decisions. And that is what I'm interested in doing, good policy. Let's make good policy. That is what I'm interested in.
And I believe on our end, we try, because we're not involved with the residents, we don't know the residents, we try to make the judgment based on the fact as opposed to the onesie-twosie cases that you're referring to. And I would be more than glad to sit down with the street director and anybody who wants to sit and talk about the policy. I think at the end of the day, we're trying to help the best we can. As I mentioned before, I know BPS gets kicked a lot of times for not being responsive. Most of the time, it is because of the very cumbersome process that we have to follow by law in order to go through and make sure that we're transparent in our delivery. In Cabinet about 2 weeks ago, somebody made a comment about BPS being quick, and I just had to laugh a little bit about that because I said in 32 years of being with the city, I've never heard anybody refer to BPS and quick in the same sentence. So I understand where you're all coming from, and from my heart, we try every day. We do the best we can with what we have.
Okay, Alderwoman Boyd has a question, follow-up question.
Both of you guys, this is my question, because I keep hearing, and Alderman Bosley and myself were asking the question, if we have a ordinance and a process for the stop signs, and so they're passed, people are getting stop signs, and you all kept saying you all don't want to be liable if something happens. And so what I'm saying is, in regards to the speed bumps, you said if something happens and you all need to have, I guess, your background work to say we did the research or whatever. So if somebody's running stop signs and they kill somebody, are you all saying the same thing? That you're doing a study and you felt this stop sign was justified, or, how are you protecting yourself on stop signs?
That's a process that's set already. I don't even know how long ago that was set, but it is set by city code that our study is not a part of the process. It can be initiated, and I have had all the persons request the traffic division's take on if a particular stop sign is warranted, and there's ones that I don't know about till I see them in Streets Committee, because by city code, they don't have to do a study.
That's interesting.
So we end up with a situation where there is potential.
And so, and that's what I'm saying, because I'm using the same dialogue that you use. Mm-hmm. But if somebody hits somebody running a stop sign, you're not liable.
I'm saying, well, I guess lawyers can argue whatever lawyers want to argue, but personally, I think that is something where the city is open for that, because I'm trying to stop that process before it goes that way, where nothing is looked at and just put in. And I'm saying maybe you'll hit one that's a good one, but there's potential for the bad ones. We're set up right now with the stop signs where those go in.
Okay, thank you,
So you're welcome.
thanks.
Want to follow up?
I was just gonna say, just as far as, just a quick comment, that, I don't think that justification is kind of in the same, I don't think we have had anybody sued, or has the city ever been sued because somebody else ran a stop sign? It's like, I want to sue the city because this stop sign was here. It's like, just like with the flower pots, right? We put them anywhere we want, as long as they're not in front of a bus line. I mean, all we got to do is send an email and send you $1,000, or was it $200, something like that. But, I mean, there is nobody, I mean, they hit them on a regular basis. I don't think no insurance company has ever tried to come after the city because we had a flower pot in the middle of the street. And I also would think that, if there were some state regulations on how speed bumps, or federal regulations on how speed bumps have to be put in, is there anything that says statewide or nationwide that you have to do an independent study before you install a street hump, or it is deemed an improper process? I think that itself would cause some type of a suit, or a lawyer would be able to sue on that premise. But is there any national, just like they have national codes for plumbers, national codes for electricians, national codes to apply asphalt, is there a national code that says when installing street humps there must be a street study, and what that street studies, what are the, not the ramifications, but what are the, what those street studies outline? What are the guidelines on saying that, if I was right now wanting to read something that said, this street study will deem, any street liable, or any street to have a street hump, if it fits within these guidelines, like where can I find that, or is there one?
There are different references that the engineers use for those type of things. The Manual Uniform Traffic Control Devices is one. It's short for the acronym is MUTCD. There's NACTO's design guide, which is specifically for traffic calming features in urban areas. So there's these guidelines or these codes as far as what we follow for the application of those. From a nationwide or statewide level, it's left up to the locals to be more specific on how that's applied, and that's how we whittle down to where we're at.
Right, so locally, if we say we want them, once again, there's no national thing that says if the locals want them, they shouldn't have them. Like, there's nothing nationally that, once again, that has to follow a guideline, so you have to fit these, what's in this particular guideline, and you have to, if you don't do this, then no matter where you at, this is an improper usage of speed humps. Is there anything out there like that?
Hump specific? No,
Hump
there's nothing that
specific.
specific on statewide or national level. It's just, probably a lot of things aren't included at statewide level because they only get so specific, so they just put that in the authority of the local street director, for example.
Only reason I ask, I would think suing us would be probably something that that just be you wasting your money, seeing as there is no specific guidelines nationally on how we regulate speed bumps. That's just something we put in place locally. It's saying we want to do studies. It's a choice. Right?
I'll get into traffic signals. That comes up all the time. Our staff has to do expert testimony. Every time there's an accident or a crash at an intersection, the lawyers, they take a look around the signal and they say, hey, this might have something to do with it. So
Specifically
multiple
with
times
speed
a month.
bumps.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying this could grow into that because people are going to catch on sort of to what this, the potential. And I'm hypothetical, but signals came around, people started asking about signals, and we started doing testimony for those because somehow they thought those were part of the accident.
Understood.
Perhaps the speed hump could end up being the same thing. So it all goes back to, we as a local authority look back to all these different guidelines for signals, for stop signs, for what we're doing, and I try to make the best decision I can within the powers I have.
So with the testimonies you've done as far as the street lights, have we ever been liable? Maybe, I would see if we have a faulty street light, maybe one that was, well, once again, faulty. You got this light flickering.
Right, yeah,
this,
I bet if you asked our city councilor, they could probably summarize cases that we've had that maybe we have had to make a payout. I don't see that on our testimony goes, and then I never see
hear
it
from
where
it
it goes,
again.
but I'm sure they could provide some sort of summary for you.
Right.
just for reference, yeah.
Thank you. I mean, once again, thank you. Appreciate it.
Jamie, if you would have someone on your staff put together a presentation on traffic calming options. I remember some years ago, Deanna did do that for the committee. I think it was a new committee now. I think would be helpful if we did that. Also, I don't know if this is for you or maybe City Council Officer, but I'd be curious to know if someone can do some research on municipalities that's been sued because of speed humps across the country. If you could do that for me.
Yeah, and I do want to summarize what my action items are. One was to do what you just said. The other was to provide, from when we first did the request, to when, from inception to when they're actually installed.
Correct.
Type of summary. And then the third is the legal counsel to get the, to take a look at the lawsuits that we've had on other similar situations. Okay, I just want to make
Sounds
sure.
good. Okay, Alderwoman?
I'll have questions for them.
Oh, you guys have to stand around for questions.
And so, they got up here and made all this speech about them being engineers. In my role, I've been a lawyer for over 30 years. Some of the things they said are absolutely not true, okay? Just absolutely not true. My first question I have for you two is, and I guess we have to share this mic, is a speed study and engineering study the same thing?
Actually, Alderwoman, if you don't mind, can you use the mic down at the end, either, on that end right there? That way the dialogue would be easier.
Yes, and my description of those two is the same thing. A speed study is a type of engineering study.
But engineering design is different, is that correct?
Engineering design is different, yes, ma'am.
So, and when we build things, we have to have an engineering design, has to be stamped. Do the speed studies that have been done, have they been printed out? Like in my ward, when I asked for a speed study, you talked about putting the boxes out there on the street, and then 2 days, 5 days, whatever, then did you print out a study, a result?
They should be.
There should be a result. Did you share them with any of the alder people?
You should be.
I have never gotten one, ever. And just telling you, never gotten one. What actually does the speed study do except for decide because what I've been told by, and she's gone now, so can't, is that it was a decision based on if there was enough speed to put it in the first place, correct?
That's right.
But the design is what we have to make sure that is correct to stand up to the legal test. Because if we don't have a correct design, that's where we get into the legal argument.
So where I was referring to it is that if we have no justification to put it in, and as Alderman Boyd referred to, and an accident does occur from that, there are two things that will be looked at. First of all, the design of how it was constructed, which you're 100% correct. And then the other part is why was it there in the first place? And so the question becomes is, why did you install something in the public right away in the first place?
Because we can, because the law allows us in the state of Missouri for us to do that. That's why it was there, because we can. And so just to answer some of the questions about lawsuits, I've been following up on lawsuits because our lawsuits have been mainly paying police officers off. So I've been requesting the lawsuits for the last 10 years. So I will give you that information, okay? There have not been any lawsuits about that stuff that you guys have been asking for. In fact, they don't even keep data about because it's such a small minutia of anything that might happen, all right? So what the data is about police officers getting sued after they shoot somebody, and then they get found not guilty criminally, but then they get found guilty beyond not reasonable doubt, but preponderance of the evidence, and then they get sued, and we have to pay $1 million settlements. The thing about why you have it in the first place, because we're allowed to do that. That's why it is. So that whole malarkey about if we put something in the street, the Alderman from the 3rd made a very good argument when he said we put these, we called them shamo pots when I was here when we first started putting them out. And they didn't cost anything. They're leftover sewer pipes. Now they cost, I was shocked when I got back here and they were charging you $200 because they're free. And some people still get free and other people didn't. So it's based on politics, who's putting their nose in the politics. That's why I'm so irritated. Mr. Bradley knows how long I've been here, things that you all don't know in this committee. I know. And he can't say, but I can. and we'll say them in the people's faces that are doing it. We have somebody from room 200 that's inserting himself in stuff that he has no business doing, and I will say the name Todd Walterman, Todd Walterman, Todd Walterman, and so things get done that have no business getting done, okay? Long as we have a good a good design about these speed humps, then that is the main legal thing that they will look at, is it was a good design, okay? And a good design will also go into where the placement is. Is that not correct?
So that, again, the design is about the composure of how
Okay.
it's put together to meet standards.
Okay.
Correct.
All right. So then my next question is this. So
But the design does not justify why it's there. So that's a different topic.
we don't have to, but the justification of if it's if it's speeding or not doesn't make any sense anyway. I had one turned down about they're not driving maybe 5 miles as much as they should. That doesn't say where they're actually going to go. That just says, the study says, should we have speed humps there or not? That's correct. It doesn't say where they're going to go,
No, it says, should they be in that block, in that periphery?
based on speed.
Yes,
Right, that's what I'm saying, not based on placement.
not based on,
Where we're going to place them on the street, just if they should be there.
no, there's a standard where they're placed. It's within the block, whether they should be or
I
not.
understand that, but the study says, should we have speed humps based on if there is enough speed going up and down that street?
That's correct.
Okay. And so if we have enough speed going up and down that street, then we get into how we design it.
That's correct.
Okay. I want to answer the chairman's question about, he didn't understand why. For many years, we didn't have speed bumps. We didn't have them. They're a little higher. And we had some lawsuits many years ago, not necessarily in this city, but around the country, that said if you hit speed humps, you were going a high speed, and somebody got hurt if it jumped and hit on the sidewalk, that once you help create that problem, you're part of it. It's like if you shovel your snow. If you don't shovel your snow, that's God put it there, okay? But if you shovel it, then people can sue you based on you didn't do a good job or you helped create that. So the whole legal argument has been that when you put speed humps in, that you created an incident and you knew that people might drive over the speed limit, and so that's why for years, we would not let anybody do speed bumps. So then we came along with these speed humps just in the last few years. The city is already accepting some potential liability by doing this. That's part of a legal thing. By us doing this, so there's nothing to say it's going to be any more liability that you're putting speed humps in the first place, you accept some liability. There's no more added about if it was a certain street where they were going fast or not, okay? In fact, it would be better to put them on the places where they're going slower, because there's less liability for that if you're really going to make the argument, okay? Because then they're not going to be jumping the curb. So all of that stuff that they're saying about, oh, we would have liability because we're putting them on streets that maybe didn't need them, that's not true. We already accepted the liability. The minute that we accepted, we were going to have speed humps. So that's just what I want to make that tell you, that that's just not true. And I've been watching this and following it and reading and legal magazines and everything to see, because I've always voted against them back from when Dan McGuire was the 28th Alderman and when I came back in the 90s, because we had such a concern about somebody getting hurt on the sidewalk, okay? And we don't have good curbs in the city of St. Louis, which is another whole problem that I've been trying to address. So when I hear you saying that we will get sued if we have them on there, that's just not true. We've already accepted the responsibility, the legal liability. And you can go check with other lawyers who've been practicing. And you can ask Julian Bush, he'll tell you the same thing. Once you decide you're going to do it, that's the liability. Mr. Chairman, I want to spend up more time because you said you're going to hold this bill, but I hope that next time, we can sit down and meet, but I hope that next time it comes before you, we will bring this out. This is about spending up extra money. Right now I've been preparing things that I've been saving since I first got elected to show you how much money we used to get, how it used to be spent. We did not used to spend money on employees and all of these things. Every year that I've been noticing this stuff, more and more things have crept in that the aldermen have no business paying for, and we have to push back on this. We are giving all our money away. We should not be paving Kings Highway or Union or Martin Luther King. That's a major thoroughfare that the city ought to be taking care of. When I got here, we only got about $80,000 a year. We didn't have this taxes. The taxes got paid under, they were passed under Mayor Bosley. Then we got this money in. We used to get $400 and something, almost $500,000, okay? So then as we got money, then they found other ways for, oh, okay, you got to pay for this, you got to pay for that. We're not going to have any money if we don't stop it. And then this whole thing about having these contracts. The city's charter requires us to hire full-time people. This privatization of things makes no sense at all. The money that they're telling us we have to pay, we could hire, the Alderman from the 3rd was absolutely right. We could hire people, and we should be hiring people. This privatization and giving it out to private contracts makes no sense. We need to hire people. So I appreciate you hearing this bill. We've spent a lot of time. They spent more time here defending their fiefdom than they did explaining to us in the first place. And I like both of these people, but these are not acceptable answers, and we don't need to have a study. We need to get things, we need to have good engineering done. And once they build good engineering, and I don't think that we've had anywhere that somebody sued us and said, well, this was badly or poorly done. And we also don't need to just be spending money for no reason. And $900 a pop is ridiculous. I have no further questions.
Okay, one other question I did have, is probably you, Jamie. So the other problem, since we want to solve all the speeding issues that I know I deal with and maybe other aldermen, is people park in the curb line instead of all the way in the street because they're tired of their mirrors being sideswiped. So how do we deal with that?
How do we deal with sideswiping? Is that what you're?
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood what you're
Yeah, that's it.
saying. So people parked on the side.
And it's because of speeding and knock people's mirrors off.
Wow, that's a pretty tough one to come up with.
Okay, can you work on that too?
Sides, so
We're
the
gonna
fourth
solve
thing
all
is
the
a
speeding
sideswiping policy?
Yep.
Okay, just make sure.
Anybody else? I'm going to take a poll. Alderwoman from the 27, you have that issue? People parking on the curbs because sideswipe mirrors?
Parking on the sidewalk.
Even the sidewalk. Alderman from the 3rd, same problem?
Yes, I do.
Alderman from the 7th? Oh.
Me either, because I've been putting curbs in because they're very important.
Yeah, it's really bad. I mean, I have a street that have a speed hump, and I have the shamo pots, and people still park on the curb. So, anyway, thank you so much. It's been a long 2 hours, but appreciate it. And I want to get together before we hear the bill again to see if we can come up with some good policy changes that, would make the bill moot, basically. Because I think some things we can do based on policy and not always on ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alderwoman, you're still up. So next bill up is Board Bill 195.
Mr. Chairman, if I could make a request, this has been a long session. If you could just hold my bill about vending, and we could just do the short one about alleys.
Okay.
And then, if that's all right with
Sure,
you?
absolutely.
Okay.
198?
Okay, and I actually made some handmade maps. One's in color, and these others are black and white.
Oh, yeah, this is hers, that's fine. I got another meeting.
Can I have, I don't have the,
We'll make policy special.
can I have a board meeting?
I can share with you.
I have another one.
Share,
if you
don't
need it.
worry.
Here's another one. Did I not?
No, you got one more.
That's enough. I have one color.
Yeah. Alderman Bosley gets the color one. It's his birthday.
Oh, okay.
He did not say thank you. Said thank you.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, members of the committee, Board Bill number 198 is a, oh, no, that's the wrong board bill. Not 198. Now, that's vending. I need the one about closing the alley. I'm sorry. Board Bill 195 is, directs the Director of Street to permanently close, barricade, or otherwise impede the flow of traffic. in an alley that's directly behind, for those who live in North St. Louis, there's a Church's Chicken Egg between Lexington and Palm. There used to be the doctor's building, which has since been, we demolished that. And it's the only thing on that block. It's in the 3400 block of Kings Highway. If you look at it, it says Church's right there. Palm is on one side, Lexington. There's an X going through a building. That's because that was the doctor's building that we demolished. Okay, and behind it is residential. And we actually have the street closed off on Palm, and Lexington is one-way headed west. And so we want to close it right there. There's a alley that intersects, there's a T alley. The alley that runs between Lexington and Palm in the 4900 blocks intersects the alley that runs behind the churches. We want to close it right there at the last house on Palm so that people are cutting through. They leave the church's lot and they cut through and they go down the street one way and they do all kind of things. And so it really doesn't affect anybody's residential. It just cuts it off right there at the alley where the alley's T. And that's what we're attempting to do. It's about 240 linear feet from Palm Street, and it contains an emergency clause. And I want to just tell you, in the future, the White Castle you'll see on Palm, White Castle's is supposed to be building a new store. They've been working on that for a while. We're going to do some other changes, so this just goes in along with what we intend to do, which is to move the exit that White Castle's has now, to move it up nearer to Kings Highway, to move the street closing up, and so to make sure that we have all the residential properties behind the street closing. Right now, we have that last building on Palm is in front of the street closing. It's to the west of where we actually have those barrels, the shamel pots. And we're going to move that up in another ordinance or board bill. But right now, we just want to cut off the people cutting through. They're dumping, and they're going down the street wrong ways and doing all kind of things, and that will cut that off. And they will still be able to go out on Palm from the Church's Chicken or out onto Kings Highway, and it would take the commercial traffic off the residential streets and alleys.
Okay, Alderman Murphy.
So I'm sorry. I see where you want to cut off. How, aren't there refuse trucks that have to go up and down the long part of the T? And how are they going to get up and down?
They can come in from Euclid. So Euclid is the first street past Kings Highway, okay, the first
Right.
street east. So they can come in from Euclid,
Okay,
and then they can come in and they go out Lexington, which is one-way west.
okay, but, okay, I guess. I thought that's the alley part that you want to close.
No, this is actually there's an alley that, see, Kings Highway is in front of churches.
Right.
Behind churches is an alley,
Yes,
okay? And that alley runs the same as Kings Highway, north and south.
right.
Euclid is the next street east of Kings Highway, and that runs the
Down
same way
here.
as Kings Highway. And they actually can come up Euclid and go out, although I will tell you, the trash trucks may go down the wrong way streets as often as anybody does.
Right.
But if they wanted to follow the law, they would just come up Euclid, pick up the trash, and go out Lexington. And there's a stoplight at Lexington because it's right across the street from the post office.
Okay. It's your ward.
No, I should be able to explain this, no.
You're explaining fine, but it is your ward.
No, I come before the street committee to ask your support.
Alderman Coulter.
No questions.
Alderman Pam Boyd.
No question. I know the area well, so I know what she's talking about.
Alderman Bosley.
No questions.
She got it mapped out. I know what she's talking
Yeah, I
about.
really appreciate the map.
Yeah, she got it mapped out.
It's going to be our new standard, making sure we have maps when they're doing street closures and barricades and stop signs and all the other stuff.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Chairman, because we asked for that in rules too, because it becomes real hard. So that's what we've been asking for, so I want to set an example.
Thank you, appreciate that. Let me just make sure I'm clear. So the pots are there now, and the White Castle driveway, it's right across from where that car is, right?
Yes.
Okay. So have they changed the driveway approach?
No, I was just showing you what else we're going to do, okay? This bill only is to the alley where it says close the alley, but this is what we're going to do. That's coming with another bill.
Right, but you're getting ready to close it right here, where the point of the arrow is that correct?
No, that's what we're going to move. It's the alley behind the churches, see?
Right. I was like, no, it's back there.
See, that's what I.
Oh.
You see where the church is?
Okay.
And then there's the X.
Gotcha, okay, gotcha.
It's better on that one. I should have made color, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Looking at Tom.
And actually, Mr. Chairman, I made the color one for you. But you gave it away.
Okay, all right, I'm with you. Okay, I'll entertain a motion on Board Bill 195.
I move we pass Board Bill 195 out of committee with a due pass recommendation.
Second.
It's been moved and second. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Moore, Alderwoman Murphy, Alderman Kotar, Alderwoman Martin, Alderwoman Boyd,
Aye.
Alderman Bosley,
Aye.
Alderwoman Middlebrook, Chairman Boyd,
Aye.
5 aye votes.
Board Bill 195 comes out of committee with a due pass recommendation, and at the Alderwoman's request, we're going to hold Board Bill 198 to our next meeting. No other sponsors came to have their bills heard, so with that, the Streets, Traffic, and Refuse Committee is adjourned.
Thank you, appreciate it.